Yo, 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 everybody. Happy midweek. Happy Wednesday. I'm your host, Shad Deals. Thanks for checking in to our latest Traded Black podcast. Interesting show we got on here today. Two executives coming in. They're hosting a Global Cannabis Summit in Washington, D.C. next week. Big time event. All the big thinking heads of the cannabis industry, not only the American side, but the European side are going to be there. We've got the brains behind who's basically hosting this event, the two gentlemen. We're going to talk about what you should be watching and be paying attention to and some of the feedback that's going to take place at the summit. As well, Christian Angermayer, chairman of ATAI Life Sciences, is going to come in to talk about their latest earnings report and what he thinks on how this industry could perform, knowing that the small cap biotech sector right now is seeing historic lows, lowest in decades. But if we see rate cuts later this year, he still believes it's once in a lifetime buying opportunity. So we'll learn more. So with that, let's jump in. Welcome into AV here on a Wednesday midweek. Good to see you. You ready for this?
Yeah. It's second podcast today. I was on the Alpha Noon earlier with
how'd that go?
It was good. It was good. It was easy conversation. Got some takes on some of our MSO constituents, and I'm ready to dive into this. I mean, Artemis has some of the top names in the U.S. that they got into early, and they're focused on Europe now. And I mean, just from a capital allocation standpoint, it should be a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah. Our two guests, as I said, one of them is actually a former executive of Goldman Sachs, as you said, and another one managing director at JP Morgan. So a lot of experience on Wall Street, but they've taken their show on the road to London, England. So with that, let's welcome in co-founder, managing partner of Artemis Growth Partners, Will Muecke, along with managing member Stanton McLean. And you guys are first time to the podcast, but we met you actually a couple months ago. You actually hooked us up with Mr. Finn Hansel a couple of weeks ago with regards to Sanity Group, and thank you for that. But I think it's important basically for our audience to know basically who you are, this big summit that's taking place, and the expertise and experience you have within the European market, cannabis market to be more specific. But with that, Will, maybe just outline your background a little bit, why you got interested in the cannabis space, and likewise with you after he's done, Stanton.
Sure. Great. And look, guys, thanks for having us on. Great to be on the show. Love the show. Great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I, as you have said, I was a longtime banker. I've been in finance for 30 years. I came into cannabis actually because it was a personal event. My sister passed away from cancer in 2007. At the end stage of her disease, she was on very heavy opioids, nearly to the point that the next kind of press in the pain pump gave her no pain relief and likely would have killed her. So she was in California. Luckily, they had compassionate medical access laws. Her doctor prescribed her medical cannabis. I'm 57. I was raised under Nancy Reagan, just stayed under drugs. My idea of cannabis was kind of kids giggling behind the gym after school. But when I saw my sister's experience, which really, it was a near miraculous transformation. She had young kids at home. When she was on the opioids, she was kind of not there. On cannabis, she came back to earth and had a very much improved quality of life, not only for her family and for us.
Yeah.
So I got into cannabis really for personal reasons. And then as a banker, as a fund manager, I left Goldman Sachs to start a private equity fund in Latin America. We were doing ESG investing then, and I saw cannabis from the outside, and I saw it as a growth area, and frankly, being on the right side of history. I think the data is a really important place to focus on for cannabis, what the efficacy is for patients. And then the growth, what that means for investors is significant. So we started a fund back in 2017, first investing in 2018.
Yeah.
Basically a $5 million pool of capital into about $400 million of US AUM across 5 funds and 1 debt fund, five equity funds and 1 debt fund. So we've been in this space for a little while now.
That's good. As far as growth, I know, and we'll get into you in just a minute, Stanton, but you still believe that there's big growth opportunities on the horizon, Will?
Look, I do. I think that we have an issue with the regulatory environment. It's very difficult, obviously in the U.S. with a dissonance between federal illegality and state sort of quasi-legality. But it's undeniable that the industry is growing at 20 to 25% a year. I mean, the industry this year in 2024 was a $45 billion industry. It's going to be north of $50 billion this year. It's going to be targeted at a $65 billion level in 2029. So, in a couple of years, it's going to get very big. And in Europe, it's a nascent industry. It's only about $2 to $3 billion in size, but it's growing in that same time frame to somewhere between 6 and 9 billion. So the amplitude of where we're going with this, the legal revenue step up is significant. It's a difficult place to operate unless you're doing it 24/7 because the regulations are so onerous.
Yeah. Well,
in terms of growth, Or go
I
ahead,
was
Ken.
just going to let him outline real quick, just his background, but I'm just going to say, anytime you hear people that worked at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, it's going to grab people's interest. But Stanton, your background, like I said, you are a managing director for a number of years at JP Morgan. That's a big step, obviously, to get into this space. But what grabbed your interest, and maybe, again, a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so Shad, I spent 25 years at JP Morgan, the first 7 in New York, and then the rest over here in the UK. I moved over here in 2003 when the leverage finance market was just sort of opening up. U.S. private equity had just gotten here, and we were able to build out that space for a number of years. I left in 2021 to join Will. In 2019, I joined the board of a medical cannabis company, a medical cannabis and CBD company here in the UK. When I realized what Will was doing, and also realized that it was time for me to go climb a second mountain, it worked out that we partnered together, and it's been an absolutely great last 3 years. So
Stan's being humble. He basically built the leverage finance distribution business for JP Morgan coming over here 20 years ago. And when I saw Stanton, it was like, you've built an industry before. We are actually one of the, I think, largest investors in the space still. And we're building a brand new industry. And I need to have folks that have seen this kind of movie play out before. And I think that we're both, personally wed to the efficacy of medical cannabis. We see how it will change the world. It will change society. It will change a patient experience. It will be better for policing, for taxation, for job growth. So there's a lot of philosophical push here besides just the economics.
Yeah. Go ahead, Anthony.
You guys were early investors in some of the major brands in the U.S., Raw Garden, Kiva, some of the MSOs that are still around today. And then you've deployed a ton of capital in the European Union. Who's getting it right in terms of regulatory structure and how these markets have kind of grown from inception with the EU and the U.S.? Do you think that the U.S. starts to look more like the EU on a go-forward basis, or like which one's getting it right?
I think we have a lot of hope that with the new administration, because everything that you're seeing happening in Europe, if applied to the US, unlocks a tremendous amount of economic potential for the United States and leadership potential. Right now, the US is kind of ceding that leadership, especially as it relates to pharmaceutical development of cannabis compounds, turning into licensed medicine, turning into pharma drugs. They're ceding that to the rest of the world. And so if you're thinking of America first, the cannabis industry, I think in 2023 had 426,000 jobs in the US, and they're not included in the jobs report because it's a federally illegal market. So when you think about the jobs report, when you think about the tax revenues, over $13 billion of cumulative tax revenues in the US, that's on a state level. If you open that up, again, if you remove 280E and a lot of the encumbrances that we see because of the Schedule 1 listing for cannabis, you unlock a huge economic dragon that could be the United States. So when you're saying America first, we're not in a market that jobs are coming and falling off of trees. Like, we need to have employment. We need to have legal employment. We need to have safe banking. These are all things that work in the favor of rule of law and economic growth. So I would think that people sitting in a decision place in the US should be looking to the European market, especially to Germany, because there are huge potential opportunities of mapping what Germany has done to a United States model and creating, the leader on a global scale, not just within the states of the US, but on a global scale that should be the US cannabis market.
I was saying that a couple of weeks.
Sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
I was going to say a couple of weeks back, I was saying that someone needs to go to Donald Trump and say, the US needs to lead the world in cannabinoid research. Point 100%. Blank, jobs, start to move that needle, and then just let him be, because he wants the US to lead in X categories, as many as possible.
I would even start by saying you already have legal THC in the US. I mean, we talk about cannabis as a plant, which it is, but the reality is the regulations go around a molecule, Delta-9 THC. And yet the regulations are specific to what the origin of the molecule is, whether it comes from a plant that expresses it below a 0.3% expression or higher than that. So you either have regulated cannabis or you have hemp. And the idiocy around that is what we really care about is the regulation of a molecule. If I think about, our favorite phrase these days is one plant, two markets.
Right.
You have a huge, robust opportunity on the medical side alone. That could be a multi-$100 billion market when you talk about compound development, testing, and then global sales, exporting from the US cannabinoid compounds that are medicines. And then you have an entire industry that is really separate to, but adjacent with, the medical market, which is the consumer market. And if you think about just an analog, alcohol it's a commodity. It's ethanol. And yet you have an $800 billion market that sets up lifestyle around a single commodity molecule.
Yeah.
If you look at cannabis, and it's just Delta-9 THC that we're really talking about when we talk about regulation, we should be thinking about how do we regulate the molecule? Not where is it coming from, but where does it go into? And then who is actually consuming that, whether it's a patient or a consumer? It's a silly way that we've stigmatized cannabis and that we thought about the plant in the past. It seems to me that the sense comes from leave stigma behind and look at data. And data shows that when you regulate these markets well, use Germany for an example, you lower overall healthcare costs, you lower the cost of enforcement and policing, you increase job growth, you increase tax revenue, and you basically serve society in a far better way than having illicit cannabis running around.
Yes.
Putting out. The issue really comes down to legality and taxation in the US, and we haven't gotten it right. And Germany is a great example of how you can do it right.
Mm-hmm. One thing you see on a consumer trend side too is what do 25-year-olds have more than any of us here, and that's time. And when you look at all other trends and you look at people in their 20s, like it's cannabis is on the rise, alcohol is on the way down, and it is. But I understand alcohol has been around for 100 years, and that's something that's left. The train left the station 100 years ago. That's not changing anything with regards to trying to make an argument for cannabis, but when I look at look, you guys have got some government officials. I want viewers to get some value out of this interview today to say, okay, you've got a global cannabis summit that's taking place in the nation's capital next week. You got the best thinking heads, both the North American and the European side, along with government officials. So when people are there, and for those that can't make it, what's the education that you want to convey to policymakers in DC about what you're doing in Europe that we can learn lessons from?
Look, I think, first of all, the summit was designed to be sort of, by, and for the regulators. So this really is a summit, almost like a graduate level symposium on cannabis. And the reason we did this is because we use the US as a contra-example for how to legalize the cannabis space. We look at Germany again because it is a highly regulated market. It's open for imports. It drives the cost of cannabis down. Those economics actually are working to stamp out the illicit cannabis market and move illicit consumers of cannabis into the legal market. Mm-hmm. So that dynamic itself was sort of the foundation element when we saw Germany finally, which it was delayed. It was a couple of years in delay. We've been watching this. We've been investing in Europe since 2018, but it finally came to fruition on April 1st of last year. And the growth in Germany, you had Finn on the show, going from 250,000 patients pre-April 1st to roughly 700 to 900,000 patients at the end of the year. It's basically a Florida. And it's a Florida that has amplitude and growth well beyond Florida because of the 83 million people living in Germany and less than 1% penetration.
Yeah.
So when we get back to what were we afraid of as investors, is we were afraid that when Germany legalized, all of these other European countries that were raising their hands, and it's not just Europe, it's the international markets as well, that they would not lean in. Most of the regulators coming to cannabis have never thought about cannabis before it was put in front of them on their desk. They come out of ag, they come out of healthcare, they come out of finance. They don't really know what cannabis is. And our worry is that these new countries, whether it's Poland or the Czech Republic, even Denmark that's had a pilot program in place, now a permanent program since 2018, we worried that they wouldn't share best practices. And more importantly, they wouldn't have a safe space to talk about what went wrong. And so again, we use the US as a contra-example, which is a series of walled gardens. We have every state that has a different regulatory body, a different regulatory framework. It's a complete mess. And yet in our portfolio, luckily, we've been supplying our portfolio with capital. So they're revenue positive, cash flow positive, and growing, but with great constraint. And so we didn't want Europe to be that way. So we said the only way to do that is to have the regulators lean in. And the only way the regulators are leaning in is by bringing them together. We used to say that if the worst thing came out of this summit is that we had a chat group that included all of the global regulators together just so they could share their ideas, their opportunities, their experiences, we'd be victorious.
The goal here is to break down silos, Shad, and get people communicating, right? And that's not happening on a global basis, and that needs to start happening more regularly, more frequently, and hopefully having all these people in DC, those conversations start, the relationships begin, and people leave DC with good connectivity that will be beneficial to all of us in this industry going forward.
I think the message, just to answer your question directly, finally, Anthony, is that what we hope from the U.S. is that those that are participating, we have seated congressmen and senators coming, we have former HHS representatives, folks coming from UN, and even former representatives of the FDA. We want them to say, let's step away from stigma. When you look at the European markets, it's all data driven. And there's a lot of, the fact that Germany passed a law that allows for a state-based system paid for, or at least subsidized by the state on a national healthcare program, and they use it as a tool to actually drain the black market, the illicit market, of its economic power, and they use it as a tool to lower overall healthcare costs. It's not driven by belief, it's driven by data. And what we want in the US is a data-driven conversation. If we have data and we step away from belief, there's no way that you can say that Schedule 1 cannabis should exist. It should be regulated as any other medical product. And frankly, we should have a national program for legal cannabis, just like Angie in Germany. And then every state would have access. And then from a Republican standpoint, if you talk about recreational use or adult use, let the states decide for themselves. Like, it doesn't have to be mandated that you opt in or opt out. But federally, it is silly that we're leaving hundreds of billions of dollars of economic firepower behind without having the opportunity of really pressing the pedal to the metal on driving growth in the medical market.
Go ahead, Anthony. Anthony, you froze there.
Yeah.
Well, we all know in the U.S.
I was going to say you bring up a pretty I keep.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I keep getting little circles on StreamYard. So you bring up a pretty cogent point that the industry needs to leverage data. We have the data; it's there. We just Oh,
I think we lost him.
But
I'm not a bandwidth whisperer, so
yeah. I was going to say off the top, we see it everywhere in the U.S. right now, where facts actually are superseded by ideology. That happens everywhere right now. But data is going to be the huge talking point. And I know, like, some of the people that you work with have extensive data and trends that you've seen within the European market. But we've kind of highlighted this in the last couple of weeks. If rescheduling were to happen in the U.S., what kind of effect would that have? Because their drug policies often look sometimes as like the first mover, so to speak. Would other countries in these pilot programs start to really embrace it more so because what they're seeing in Germany and what could happen potentially in the U.S.?
I think the biggest issue is the U.S. basically has the boot on the throat of the the UN Single Convention. So what happens in the U.S. really casts a large shadow over what happens globally.
Yeah.
And so if the U.S. were to move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, I think it alleviates a lot of the burden for new economies to say, actually, this looks like a good program to go in. They're not afraid of going afoul of U.S. policy. They're not afraid of what would happen from a global charter standpoint. So I do think it has a meaningful effect well beyond the shores of the U.S. I think it actually has an international impact. But the international markets aren't waiting. They're not going to wait for the U.S. to do anything.
No.
The U.S., it's kind of a basket case from a regulatory standpoint. We have huge investments in the U.S., so it's not like we're leaving the market behind. But it's a frustration that we have been sort of stymied under, and so it's more of a, if you were to just move to Schedule 3, you would unlock so many opportunities, not just in the US, but globally. And that's where the US wants to play. Like, we really should be driving our best scientists towards sequential improvements in cannabis research that will lead to drugs. And then we should be exporting those to the world. We should be on the bandwagon of showing high medical efficacy.
Do you see a natural progression? Do you see a natural progression in this industry going, let's say, to South America, Mexico, and jurisdictions south of the border? I know that they're working on legislation in Brazil currently, which has a massive population, but it just seems like the natural progression is to go to Mexico and South America as the growing climate is built for ag. And I mean, you can be starting to grow there at a very low cost.
I mean, look, the cut flower industry used to be owned by the U.S. until Colombia opened up, and Colombia very quickly became number one.
Yeah.
And so there's no denying that cannabis as an organic sort of manufacturer of drugs is still a plant, and that the economics behind that plant are really labor, land, water, and power. And if you can alleviate the cost of power by using the sun, anybody in the equatorial or tropical band is a perfect candidate for a cannabis cultivator, candidate for cultivating cannabis. And we have investments, large investments in folks like Clever Leaves in Colombia, and it's you're growing at pennies on the per gram cost versus a Canadian grower growing at $1, or someone even in Germany growing at north of €1 per gram. So market forces will show that these climates should be the cultivating centers of the world, even for indoor. You just have lower overall costs. I ran a fund out of Latin America for 10 years. It's a great place to do business. So I think that the US should be value add. Bring your low cost inputs from somewhere else and do what we do best. Let's put our intelligence and our science behind that and amplify, what is very low cost raw material into very high margin, high productivity, high efficacy pharmaceutical compounds.
What do you think people should be paying attention to with the European market, Stanton? Because when I had the conversation with Finn a couple of weeks ago, and Will just outlined 250 to potentially 900,000 new medical patients, one of the main reasons why, too, was the fact that it was removed from the narcotics list. But when we look at Germany's role, how much is it going to drive the overall European cannabis market and trends that we should be watching and paying attention to here in North America as it develops more and more in the next year or two?
Well, look, I think Germany is the engine on the train, as we like to say. And, one thing that's been is very interesting is that Germany and the UK opened up at the same time for medical. Germany last year, as Will said, was 250,000 patients.
Right.
The UK is still stuck at sort of 30,000 patients, right? So we need to see some growth in that market. But I think,
it comes down to education.
Absolutely.
But again, Germany's growth is going to have a huge role in a lot of that education, would it not? Or am I getting ahead of myself?
No, you're totally right. I mean, we talk to investors, not only who are already in Artemis, but are prospective to coming into Artemis. And the fact is that we have perfect data. Like, we have an investment in Bloomwell in Germany. We see the job growth. We see the revenue growth. We see the volume growth in cannabis. It's a slow indicator. It's a catch-up indicator. So a lot of the market doesn't yet realize how significant the opportunity is in Germany. I think you guys were some of the first ones to really start broadcasting from Finn on a global scale. I mean, the TDR audience is a very large audience with far reach. A lot of people didn't know that. I mean, I think it was a wake-up call for even you guys to say, I didn't realize that we have, a Florida going to a California in Germany. And that's one country. There are 750 million people when you aggregate all of the European nations, and there are 19 legal medical cannabis programs that all have state-funded support. So when you think about, again, if we're lucky and the regulators do lean in and we have harmonization of our regulatory framework, it will be a single framework for an international supply chain. That's going to be incredibly powerful. And you think about 750 potential patients and consumers. Again, I will say on record that the experiments that we're seeing in the Netherlands and in Switzerland for pilot programs in rec, those will take shape, those will have traction, but we're still years away from sort of free and clear, open California style recreational cannabis. And frankly, we don't want to do it like California. We don't want to do it like New York. We want to do it like something that's far better. But when you think about just the medical program, just the medical bases of driving the cannabis markets across Europe, that is a potential $100 billion market. You can't deny that is a great place to invest. And because the growth rate is so high, you don't have to be in every company. You have to be in a couple of really good businesses. You have to do the diligence and learn the teams. But that growth rate of 2 to 9 is a really nice curve for industry. We're delighted to be investors there, and we welcome people in. We want to teach the world, because this is going to be a lot of hands to lift this boat. And so we need more institutional capital to come in. And right now, the institutions are sitting on their hands. But as the data comes out, I can guarantee we've had the conversations inbound that large institutions, brand names that everybody would recognize, want to be in the space.
Are those? Do you think those institutions are going to be more comfortable allocating capital to a market such as the EU versus the US, with some of the things that we've seen as far as leverage, deteriorating fundamentals, I mean, these guys obviously are going to go back and do their diligence over the last couple of years as to what's happened. Do you see them being more interested in allocating towards the European Union versus the US?
It's as simple as they understand the growth. A lot of the PMs have already been privately investing and have gone through the whipsaw of what's been going on in the US markets. But the reality is, until the US has federally legal, not just permissible, but federally legal investment opportunities in cannabis, institutional money is not going to show up. The entire stock market in publics for cannabis, it's run peer-to-peer. It's all mom and pop. Unless someone is putting money into MSOS or some of the index funds, there's no one really coming in on an institutional basis, again, brand name, into cannabis. They can't. They are prohibited.
Yeah.
So the only game to play is in Europe. It's a small market, but it's going to grow rapidly. And we, as I said, we spend a lot of our time outside of our portfolio talking to people who want to come into the space.
Yeah.
We'd love to partner with them. We'd love to raise money with them, but it's more, we just want to educate them because their capital coming in lifts the tide for all boats.
Yeah.
And it's happening. It's already happening.
And just as a follow-up to Shad's question, do you think a country like the UK starts to fast track or catalyze their progress if the US moves versus getting data and seeing the success that's going on in Germany?
I think the UK is a little bit of a unique example. I think the biggest issue with the UK is the Proceeds of Crime Act. And so as our shorthander is POCA. And it's interesting because one of the territories that is UK law is Jersey. And Jersey was able to add literally 14 lines. I mean, the Proceeds of Crime Act basically says everything's illegal except for, and alcohol is one of those except fors. And basically the folks that did this are actually partners of ours, Tenacious Labs. They were very astute. They went to Jersey and they said, whatever you have for alcohol, let's redact alcohol right in cannabis. And then you, Jersey, can put this into your Proceeds of Crime Act. And all of a sudden you have a legal market where people can invest in companies. You don't have this penalization for investment, and you don't have any legal risk. And so here, unfortunately, you know, in the 5 years that I've been in the UK, we probably had just as many prime ministers.
Yeah.
We need stable government.
More than that.
Yeah, more than that. Some only for a couple of days or a couple of months. We just need a stable government because I think the voice, both on the shadow government and then whoever's in power, we've had these conversations through Tenacious and through our partners that they don't deny that the jobs are there, that tax revenue is there. I spoke in Parliament about 2 years ago as expert testimony to say, if we were to legalize just, you know, amplify medical cannabis, take away POCA, we don't have to do anything else. It's not even talking about recreational cannabis. We could increase the job penetration and the tax revenues here to 500,000 jobs and £5 billion or more of annual tax revenue. And this is for a budget that has, you know, between a $20 and $40 billion tax hole. I think that when you talk to politicians, it's catnip when you talk about jobs and tax. And here's an industry that's already ready to go. We have 210 million illegal consumers of cannabis around the world. And a lot of those, if given the opportunity to get safe, legal cannabis delivered to your door in 72 hours, that's been tested and is delivered to you at a price that is at or cheaper than you can find in the illicit market, you're going to have what's happening in Germany. You're going to have this watershed event of illegal consumers moving into legal patients. And it's a simple argument.
I'm a British citizen, and I mean, I pay attention to their politics. You want to talk about a government that's in more turmoil than the U.S., the UK and Great Britain as a whole would probably take the cake. But it'd be nice to see some progress. And the POCA, I know they've been wanting to reform for some time now. They just can't get any sort of semblance of congruency across anybody speaking about the fact to kind of come to terms with it.
They just need a government to stay in place for long enough for it to happen. I mean, look, cannabis, even in the U.S., it is way down on the agenda. Right? So it's going to be a tack on to crypto. It's going to be, you know, maybe its own thing, but it's not the first order of business. We in the cannabis industry, we love to talk ourselves to death that it's so important, but the reality is it's not that important.
Yeah.
Unless you really think about, if you take the logical conclusion of what
it can be, though, with the right education.
It should be. I mean, look,
it should be.
And to, again, any politician who doesn't like jobs, who doesn't like tax revenues, these should be things that people line up for, and all they need to do is just read the data.
Learn something
new. If the rumors are true and the king's actually using medical cannabis for his treatment, the UK might move, you know, a little bit faster because the stigma here is strong.
Very. I saw that this morning. It was actually nice to see.
We had our team call the White House,
Buckingham
Palace, and ask if it was true. You know, we didn't get a straight answer. I think that we were all kind of giggling behind the door as it was happening. But the fact that there's even a rumor out there, we know that Prince Harry has an affinity for the healing side of plant-based medicine. So it would just logically make sense, like in my own family. Like, we are not a family of folks that were taking recreational mushrooms or cannabis, and yet my sister's experience was a lightning bolt. It was just a shocking change that the stigma was all garbage. It's such bad misinformation. And so we're in an era where we don't trust what's been put out there. We need to have numbers. Numbers don't lie. And so let's get away from the headlines. Let's get away from the BS conversations. Let's go back to the numbers and talk about where this market's going, and it's going up.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get your word out to the king, you should contact that guy that broke into Buckingham Palace years ago and sat at the end of the bed with the Queen.
Just have to give him a couple of grams of cannabis to take with him.
Yes, you learn something new every day, and I didn't realize that Anthony is a British citizen. So
I didn't either.
Viewers out there, you'd never know it.
I've got dual passports.
I'm not the biggest fan of UK food, but this man knows how to cook. He is phenomenal.
It's the Italian. That's the Italian side.
The last thing I'd say is that the industry itself in the U.S. really does have the right mindset. I think that they've been put against a rock and a hard place with the regulatory environment the U.S. has been under the yoke of. And when we think about where this industry could go, it's a little bit like, the U.S. was a bottoms-up, sort of news-driven, media-driven, deregulatory environment. It was a lot of state referenda. What we need to now have is actually very sharp and thoughtful lobbying. And frankly, we need harmony. Like, we shouldn't have a hemp group and a regulated cannabis group. Like, we're all talking about the same thing. It is the same plant. It's one plant, two markets. We're really talking about Delta-9 THC, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, what type of plant. It matters what it can do in the marketplace. Yeah. And again, if we did this for medical and we also did this for consumer, we'd have two multi-$100 billion markets in the US alone. And on a global scale, it becomes very attractive. Yeah. But it comes down to the industry having a voice and having funding to have that voice. And it starts with, the repealing of the Schedule 1 situation, which will finally unlock some economic drivers that will put us back on our feet.
We can only hope. The upcoming Global Cannabis Regulatory Summit touches down in Washington, D.C. next week, March 26th, 27th. Will, Stanton, look forward to seeing you guys in person next week, and safe travels across the pond, and we'll see you in the nation's capital next week, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us on the show.
See you guys.
Bye, guys. See you next week.
Cheers. Should be a big time event. And like they said, there's members of the HHS. There will be members of the DEA there. There are policymakers that are going to be, but we will be there and we'll provide all the information and stuff that we witnessed in Washington next week once we get back in the live stream. So that'll be good. That wraps up segment 1. It's now time for segment number 2 of our podcast, Psychedelic Market Minute. Here we go. This is Psychedelic Market Minutes, presented by Advisor Shares ETF, PSIL, PSIL. And now it's time to bring in probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest name in the psychedelic space. Back to the podcast, the chairman of ATAI Life Sciences, Mr. Christian Angermayer, who's been waiting patiently in the background. Apologies, that went a little longer than anticipated, but good to see you. How are things?
Good to see you all. Well, I used it, jumped back in a meeting, had quick lunch, so all is good.
A guy like you who's got contacts, he's always doing work. You know what? I'll be back in 25 minutes. But look, there's some interesting times, I know, with this industry. We're now into 2025. And I think there's a lot of, I know when you look at the overall market right now, I know there was a tweet that you put out about the small cap biotech sector right now is seeing historic lows, but there has been a little bit of optimism building within the psychedelic space, especially at the appointment of RFK. But how are you feeling knowing that a lot of these readouts and data from bigger companies like ATAI are going to come to fruition within the next 18 months? Because time is going by and we're getting closer to a lot of these top line data readouts, which will be very interesting for the overall space.
Yep. First of all, thanks for having me back. I always love it. Thanks for the interest in psychedelics. I'm feeling obviously great, but I'm also have to admit, I'm always very fundamentally bullish on psychedelics, and the share price don't reflect it. That's why I put out that tweet, because it even was very how you say, very striking to me, because like if you look at the XBI, yes, the XBI is down a lot, but it's down from like 170 to like 90. So it doesn't look as bad as the feeling is on the ground. Not just in psychedelics, by the way. I'm here in Vail at a biotech conference, and small cap biotech in general got obliterated. Like all the stocks are down 80, 90%.
Right.
And the reason for this wrong perception is that in 2022, they changed the XBI, which was supposed to be a small cap biotech index, but now the three biggest names are Amgen, Gilead, and what was the third one? And another big pharma. Yeah. So the XBI is not a small cap biotech index anymore. And that's the only reason why it was holding so up, because like, yes, the Modernas of the world, the Gileads, the Amgens, they are as down as a small cap biotech. So what I did with my team, I did a remodeling of the index, how it looked before 2022. Then if we would have the old composition, the index would be at 40, 45. Yeah. And that's more from 170. So, but why I'm saying that is to say, oh my God, like I'm going to jump out of the window, which is not existing because I'm on the ground level. But it's a great buying opportunity. I think not just ATAI, like look, in ATAI I'm biased, but I do believe ATAI is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but so is honestly 20, 30 other high quality biotech small cap companies, because like ultimately, if I look at ATAI, but if I look at the other 30 companies here at the conference, they're doing great stuff. And by the way, we're all late stage. What people forget, ATAI has more than 6 late stage clinical trials, like meaning phase 2 or soon phase 3. So we're not talking about, oh, this is 15 years away. This is like 2, 3, 4, 5 years away from cash flows. Yeah. And then it's not just one drug in ATAI, it's like multiple. Yeah. And we're trading almost at cash. It doesn't make sense, because a single approved drug to cure depression, anxiety, addiction, whatsoever, is a multi-billion-dollar drug. By the way, in any environment, if interest rates would be at 5%, 6 or 7, a support, a cure, or anything which helps for one of these things is a multi-billion-dollar drug, full stop. Yeah. So, and now interest rates are actually going down. So I think that's the perfect storm. We're going to wake up, and within weeks, we're going to see re-rating somewhere. And I think it's going to be in the second half year, to be fair, because I think last sentence, why is it not happening yet? I think people are still puzzled by the whole noise from the White House and trade wars and whatever.
Tariffs.
I'm a deep and I know some of the people on both sides, or on the German side and on the US side. It's a lot of show. Yeah, I don't think we're going to have trade wars. I think
I don't either.
I think there are going to be some ugly headlines the next weeks, but like I think till latest end of the second quarter, all of that is solved, and we're actually going to have an amazing second quarter, low interest rates, inflation down.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah, and then it's the time for biotech.
Yeah, Anthony, you probably agree with that. When we talk about some of this tariff conversation, it feels like it's lost. Like, look, it's still very much front and center, but it feels different today than it did a month ago, don't you think?
It's a yo-yo. I mean, it's a yo-yo. Donald announces something, it gets some kickback, then it gets renegotiated, then he pushes out the dates. We're not going to go into trade wars with Germany, Canada, Mexico. Like it doesn't make sense. China, maybe. But I think he's posturing, and he's just trying to push his weight around. And he's going to get called out on it, because the Germans are investing in military right now, and they're investing a ton of money into industry. So are the Canadians, so are the Mexicans, and Trump's getting what he wanted. And then we just back off the tariffs. And like Christian said, the second half of this year.
I think he's even getting more. So sort of political information and not confidential, but I'm very confident. Let me phrase it that way. I'm very confident that under the new German government, Europe will actually push for a zero tariff world, at least between the US and Europe, which is what Trump ultimately wants. Because to be fair, and by the way, I think you both guys are Canadian, you might know it better for Canada, but what I can say for Europe and Germany, it is not fair for the US. So American cars into Europe have higher tariffs. I do think it's 25%, but I'm not an expert on it, but it's higher than European cars have towards the US. Why? It's not like it's like, so I can tell you why, because in the last century, America wanted to financially support the German economy, which was very nice, and we should be, as Germans, very grateful for.
Yeah.
But there is no reason why in 2025, Germany and Europe should still siphon off money from America. The problems in politics is if things are going on for too long, people take it for granted. And it feels as if you're taking something away. But I told my own friends in Germany, I was like, why are we charging more tariffs on American cars than they charge on us? This is not fair. Donald Trump has absolutely a point. And we shouldn't have any tariffs. Yeah, any country, like, why? What is this? This is all disturbing free markets. Like, so, and I think that's where Trump is really going, zero tariff world, and I think he's going to get it.
Yeah. Interesting. Want to look at it as well. ATAI, they recently reported its full year 2024 financials. They showed a net loss of 149.3. Despite this, though, the company has forecasted an impressive, and I want to say impressive, 67% annual revenue growth over the next 3 years, which would outpace the pharmaceutical industry's average growth rate of 8.4%. So how do you view ATAI's current financial position, and what are steps being taken to capitalize on this projected growth?
Well, but like, I don't know where this quote was, because it's wrong, because we don't make any revenues yet, because we don't have approved products. So that seems to be like an AI. Sometimes bots do that. Yeah, whatever they took out. Like, so it's very simple. We are a biotech company. Biotech company means we are investing money in clinical trials. So even the word, yes, we made a loss, but it sounds like we do something stupid. Biotech companies always make a loss because they take money invested into clinical trials, and the revenues obviously come just when the drugs are approved. So at the moment, every year, and this will go on for the next years, we're taking money, investing it in trials, but we're building up value because our therapeutics, they moving forward in the approval process. And then somewhere in the future, not that far out, when they get approved, then we're starting making revenues. Yeah, and then you see the typical revenue profile of a biotech company, which is you jump very quickly because, like, literally you're delivering something the market wants, and your profits are very high, which makes you, because you invested hundreds of millions for years, you need to earn that back. Yeah, that's what people who sometimes.
When we look at top line data and your pipeline right now, what is the earliest timeline wise of readouts? That is it 2026, or is it further on down the road as far as potential opportunities for
so very simplified, because I don't know if we have given guidance, so I can answer it more generalistically. Like, so in the next 12 months, we're gonna have 4 major phase 2 readouts.
Okay.
Which, by the way, phase 2 for me is always the most important one, because it definitely proves drugs are safe and it shows efficacy. Phase 1 is always focused on safety, simplified. Phase 2 is both safety and efficacy, and then you do a larger, more statistically relevant phase 3 once you've seen the positive, hopefully, phase 2. So that's how biotech works. So, but phase 2 normally tells people, is this a drug or not? Is this going to happen or not? So meaning every single one, and we have 4 of them. And by the way, it's within the next 12 months till end of 2 this year, mid of the year, and 2 in the first quarter next year. Yeah, every single one has the potential, in my personal point of view, because obviously the market decides, but to add several $100 million of market cap to ATAI, if not more, because it's really major readouts. And then, provided they're going well, then you normally have to add 2 to 3 years, if you're quick, for phase 3. Yeah. Okay. So let's say we have a concrete, like our most important readout this year is 5-MeO DMT. Which some people might know from the toad thing. And if this reads out now and we're quick, then we're talking about 26. We're talking about an approval end of 2028. Yeah. Okay. So roughly, which is, by the way, very quick, because like that's like again, like there are companies who are 10 years away because they're still dabbling in preclinical stuff.
So with the time horizon shrinking, and I mean, you're actively having conversations with investors now, currently at the conference. You're having conversations with investors 5 years ago. How have the conversations changed as we're getting closer and deeper into the game with the data and the readouts? Are they more excited
The thing
in
is,
terms
like,
of the
we're
efficacy?
never not excited. That is one of the
Okay.
annoying things a little bit, because I wish it it's like, it's not that, or maybe it's good. It's not that institutional investors and retail investors alike are not excited about psychedelics. I don't know if you remember when you had me on the first time. I do remember it. The one thing I told you, and I'm still standing strong on that sentence, is we do know these drugs work anecdotally. But anecdotally means with hundreds, thousands of people. Meaning, fun fact, in the UK alone, I think the number I just read is 1.5 million people per year take MDMA recreationally.
Yeah.
By the way,
I
these
believe
will
that.
be hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, who take psilocybin, the active ingredient magic mushroom. So we have sort of, it's not anecdotal N of one.
Mhm.
Still, as you know, I'm very much in the camp, anecdotal is different than scientific, and we need to prove it in a really proper setting. But what I'm saying is that because of all that anecdotal evidence out in the wild, I'm really personally, I always need to be careful with promises, but personally, I believe we're going to succeed with all of our drugs because we do know these drugs works from anecdotal evidence. We need to translate that anecdotal evidence into real life data. And by the way, Lycos, if you remember, maps, they showed there is and it's, by the way, it's exactly what I said in your first interview with you, I think 2019, is like, it's execution risk. You can always fuck things up, trials, and then but that doesn't change. But execution,
that has happened though, right? That has happened.
Yes.
Like, I think the drugs work. It's how you conduct the trials though that runs into issues, and companies have run into that.
But I hope that is the risk people are taking when they're investing in ATAI, is that they're saying Christian and his team are doing proper execution. But what I'm saying is the drugs themselves, they do work. That I deeply believe. And this is different. Why do I stress that so much? This is different than with any new cancer treatment or anything, because we don't know. Really in these other stuff, you need to find it out. Here we know it. So, and by the way, investors know that. That was never the point. So I never had to convince somebody that our pipeline works. The problem over the year, by the way, this is why we IPO'd at 15, went up to 20, and people loved it. What happened the last 2 years is that the investors themselves got obliterated. So the funds lost sometimes 90% of their volumes. A lot of funds had to close. So this is not just on a company level. People always think about that, but in these markets, it's also carnage on an investor's level. And people underestimate how small the biotech community is. Everybody in the world invests in tech, but biotech is comparable, a much smaller industry. So you have investors who are like decimated, and the ones who survive, by the way, not because they really believe it, it's more like they have to report to their investors. They are like, let's stick with the very conservative stuff. Let's buy cardiovascular companies. Let's buy cancer companies. In these markets, I'm not going to show up with my investor and say I bought into a psychedelics company, although I know you're amazing. So it's not like that. It's not the convincing. What I need is the investor sort of community coming back, and it will come back when biotech comes back. So we are, and by the way, you see that every single day. Sorry, I'm talking, but like I'm passionate because I think it's such a big opportunity. When the market goes up, ATAI goes up normally more. When the market goes down, we go down a bit. So we are kind of an extreme, how you say, turbo warrant or whatever you say, or turbo on the market. But that's why if the market comes back a bit, ATAI will be fully back.
Welcome to the verticals that we cover, right, Anthony?
Ebbs and flows. Ebbs and flows in capital markets. Risk on, risk off.
What's your thoughts, before I let you run, what's your thoughts on RFK being appointed head of the HHS? Because I thought it was rather interesting when he made his comments. He's had his own personal experience with psychedelics and talks extremely positive about them and how we need to do more research pertaining to that. Do you, A, believe him? And do you think with his appointment, this could be a turn for the better within the American?
So, two things in general, by the way, and maybe I can say that because I'm not American, because I know it's still a contentious topic in America. But if you want to do something, look at Trump's cabinet. And several friends of mine ended up in the cabinet. This is the most competent cabinet the US had since a very long time. So look at people who
are some of your contacts that were elected into his cabinet?
Well, as one, because like when he was our IPO banker, is Howard Lutnick. Howard
Okay.
Lutnick IPO'd ATAI, and he's one of the best CEOs I've ever met. So, and he's going to crush it. It's like a great pick. So Trump picked really good people. So, by the way, is RFK Jr. This whole bullshit and it's very sad actually to see how some of these people, for pure, literally political reasons, get smeared. Full stop. Having said that, the great thing for psychedelics is I'm very happy if they pro psychedelics, but it's going so well. Again, that was a little bit which I was unhappy after the Lycos debacle, which was, and I said it publicly, and it's always said, I wish they had succeeded because MDMA deserves to be an approved medication, but there were flaws in the trial.
Correct.
It had nothing to do with the drug itself, and it had nothing to do with the FDA. The FDA is hugely supportive of what all these companies, not for a type, but I cannot complain. And I want people to know that, because meaning 6, 5, 7 years ago, I would have said, oh, maybe the FDA is a problem. No, they're very supportive in what all these companies are doing, as long as we're doing it properly, rigorous science and so on.
I was going to
so
ask,
what I want to say is like,
can I ask you this though? Like, what should people that follow this space be paying attention to when it comes to running a trial efficiently and correctly? Like, is every trial different? Is it too tough to manage?
That is, by the way, one of the issues of Biotech. But just to finish the sentence. So
go ahead.
I'm very happy if RFK or that RFK is sort of outspokenly pro psychedelics, but we don't need any political input because it's going well and it's apolitical. Science is, and I'm very much in the team. I do not want to make science, any science, and especially on psychedelics, political. Because then one side likes, but it shouldn't be like, it's science. And if we prove that these medications, who happen to be psychedelics and used since a long time and recreationally, but if we prove scientifically, gold standard, that they're valuable therapeutics, the FDA will approve them, and sorry, my phone also is ringing, and the payers will pay for them. So that's our goal.
Well, one thing's for sure. I think we've turned a corner for the better, and you're right. There has been a very good cabinet he's put in place, and I think it grabbed my interest too, just based on RFK being appointed and his, support for it. And like you said, let's put the ideology and political side of stuff to the side. Let's look at facts and data, and that's probably the most, most important and factual information that really backs up the overall industry and where it is and where it could go, because the data has been staggering, to say the least, when you see some of the results that have come out in early stage trials with various companies, yourselves, MindMed as well. There's been some really compelling stuff that's been announced over the last year or two.
Let me answer your question, because that is maybe the hard part for retail in psychedelics, or in biotech in general, is like trial design is hyper complicated. So there is not a rule I can give you, oh, look at this one, whatever. That's, by the way, is why I would always say either, and I see the marketing, and I don't know them, by the way, but I think an index fund, or like an ETF or whatever, what I see here, I don't know if you see the same, but like PSIL, really don't know them, but it's a great idea, because like, I love ATAI. I would be happy if people buy ATAI, but buy the sector. That would be one thing. Second is, though, or follow people you trust. And what I can tell you, again, I'm very biased. I founded ATAI, but I just put more. I just put $22.75 million cash into ATAI. So I anchored the last capital increase. So you could say now I'm an idiot, or hopefully I know that this is going really well, and I want to put even more money on it. So I put more money in than my pro rata, so I increased my percentage. Right? And I did it for a reason. Again, I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. So follow me, follow people you trust. So either follow people you trust or invest in the sector. And by the way, we're gonna have amazing news the next days. I don't know if this is live or not. If it's coming out today. If it is live, then follow me on Twitter. It's my name, like C for Christian, and then underscore, and then my last name, Angermayer. because I think the next days and weeks going to be great. And obviously we have the readout, so follow me through.
That's great.
Then you're always up to date.
22 million reasons to believe in Christian Angermayer. Great stuff, my friend. Always good to catch up with you. And, onwards and upwards for this space, because outside of the investment side, it's what the world needs right now. And mental health is not going away anywhere. It's only growing when you see some of the stats globally. But tell your team we say hi, and let's keep in touch, okay?
Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Bye-bye. That was great. And probably arguably the biggest name right now in the industry. But that was fascinating. $22 million of his own money to back up ATAI. He believes in the drug, and really no blueprint that you can really Sorry?
Plural. Drugs.
But there's no blueprint that you can tell on how a trial is being done efficiently or not. But that has always been kind of the hurdle with some of the cases that's gone on, that we all know the drugs. I don't want to say we all know that. That's the most compelling part of this industry. The drugs are effective, but one of the first things that grabbed everyone's attention was how these trials were conducted, especially when it came to Lycos and MDMA. That grabbed people clearly by attention, right?
Yeah.
You'll leave it at that. Listen,
I don't know I'm not even going to pretend like I know the first thing about clinical trial design.
Yeah.
It's just not something I've ever studied or looked into.
I've asked questions. There's certain dosage amounts, and what the end result is, and what you're focused on specifically. Is a lot of the patients qualitative or not? It's extremely complicated, but I agree with him when he says the drugs do work. It's just a matter of how you run each.
They do. So that I have read up a lot about, and I mean the thing is, psychedelics in their pure form work anecdotally. Correct. So psilocybin, LSD, 5-MeO DMT. The real question is what's the patentability of it, and what are the analogs that they're going to derive from it via these drugs? The viability of that is what's going to drive value creation in this industry.
Got a lot of comments on here during the Christian interview. Still can't figure out how Sanity, OGI, High Tide, Avicanna, PureCan may all fit together. I'm sure there are other partnerships in the works in Germany. What was some other? If another country has tariffs on USA products, now the other country will get a tariff in return. Yep, that's pretty much.
Christian's right. It's going to be a zero tariff environment. Trump the tariffs are BS. I mean, don't get me wrong. We love German cars in the United States. You see I've always bought German cars. There's tons of German cars in the United States. They're not going to stop bringing German cars into the United States, but it'd be nice to get them a little bit cheaper.
By the way, we are in the works of actually going to Germany potentially in June. That'll be nice, and wouldn't be a bad idea to head over to the Stores and Bickle facility. That'd be nice. That's German engineering at its finest. Drew Dickens writes, Terracin is the play, boys. All right. Well, before I let you go, you sent over to me a very interesting YouTube clip as to what's taking place in Texas, and they ain't screwing around with some of the state Senate. What I saw there today, they look pissed. But you want to maybe quickly highlight what your takeaway was with what went down?
I think they're going to kneecap hemp. They look very serious. I mean, SB3 looks like it's got teeth. I'm sure it's going to be litigated against, but they had a lot of very good points. There's 8,000 hemp shops in Texas. Most of them have popped up since 2023. What industry?
8,000 since 2023?
Yeah.
That is wild.
They also had some arguments that I didn't really agree with and or understand, which might be above my knowledge base. But they were talking about hemp beverages as to the form factor being synergized with alcohol. So they were implying that the hemp beverages actually had an alcohol content within them, which I'm not privy to any brands or form factors of hemp beverages that are dual canning alcohol and THC in the same formulation. That being said, they want the shit out of their they want the shit out of their state.
Oh, I watched the first 2 minutes. Who was the gentleman that first spoke when he brought up the 8,000 number in a matter of?
No idea. I just know Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and I know that Rick Perry is lobbying and fighting for the expansion of the medical program in Texas, because realistically, they were using the number 8 billion. I've heard the number 3 billion as far as revenue goes in the Texas market. If they really wanted to take a pragmatic view of what's going on, expand the medical program, go to a bunch of the good, clean businesses
Yep.
that are operating in Texas, grandfather them into the medical marijuana program, and just let it be, because it's going to be hard to extinguish that industry in the state of Texas.
Wild. 8,000 locations in a matter of 18 months.
Yeah.
Anyway, Fred G to Germany with VFF. We're actually in the talks with him right now, but potentially going to Holland next month with VFF. I think that would be really fascinating. We've talked to some of the crew actually a couple months back, just working out on timing wise. But Big Mike from Advanced Nutrients, he's going to be actually one of the major sponsors at a big conference in Germany in June. And he said, if you guys want to come, we'll set up the podcast studio, which Anthony and I very much are interested in, because that would be amazing just to be sitting down. We could do live streams in the middle of the floor and meet a lot of people from the European/German market, and, give you guys kind of an up close view as to what we're seeing and hearing and how the whole EU market is growing. And we'll also have more of that information next week when we're in Washington. So Anthony and I have a pretty exclusive event we're going to be going to next Tuesday night. We're going to be in the room with some pretty influential people, but we will get takeaways on what we can expect for both the North American and European markets, how they plan to work together, and even more importantly, just members of the HHS and other government agencies and officials attending this event. And hopefully they get an education on why the U.S. needs to be the global leader in research. But that's all coming up next week as well. This Friday morning, 11 a.m., Charlie Bachtel will be on with us, followed by Frank Colombo from Viridian. He'll have a full recap of the entire earnings season. So put that in your calendar. Friday morning, 11 a.m., Charlie Bachtel from Cresco Labs coming on to talk about the latest numbers that Cresco reported last week. All right, sir. Love that hat. Is that the sunburn hat?
That is the sunburn hat.
British citizenship.
You've known that. I've mentioned it probably a dozen times.
I know you have, but the audience doesn't. That's why I brought it up and played dumb. But good stuff, my friend. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Might have to start figuring out how to invest in the European cannabis industry after
I know
we'll talk.
Right? Because I thought it was a good question that you said about how institutions are going to look at the European market if things don't get they're going to step and look at the European market and how the regulated market versus the North American market, because of all the confusion that's going on. But him and Stanton obviously understand it better than anyone, having worked at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. But I thought that was rather interesting for them to outline that.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how what happens in the U.S. because there's a lot of scenarios that could happen. It's
a dose of reality. Elmo, I hear you. Simon, very good play. MindMed is a good play. David Benz, just buy Tilray, CC Pharma.
I have no interest in buying Tilray.
Oh, okay. Like what they've done, but that's a lot of outstanding shares, 900 million. But let's see how that develops. But yeah, I do think that Tilray has a great opportunity in the German market, but everybody has their own opinion.
Oh, they definitely have a great opportunity in the German market.
Huge.
100%. I'm not going to argue that.
Yeah. Pat Schwartz, Numinous. We've reached out to Peyton probably for over a year and a half. And
I think he's living in Mexico now, if you follow him on Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We covered it for a while. Looked like a good story with what they were doing from the clinical model. And then after that, it was just crickets. So there's a lot of companies in that space right now that have definitely less is more, I think. And that's the times we're in the psychedelic space. But truthfully, I do think some of the names that we just outlined, like Cybin, who bought Small Pharma, when was that? 2 years ago now?
I think it was last year.
No. More than last year. 2 years ago, at least. But close to it. But some of the IP that they bought from Small Pharma was incredible. And when are you going to go over High Tide and SNDL earnings? Captain JT Kirk, you're right. We haven't really gone in depth about SNDL and High Tide earnings. Very good point, my friend.
High Tide I covered pretty in depth in the newsletter.
We did in the newsletter. You did. That was very good. But yeah, we got to cover the SNDL. I'm going to reach out to Zach George right now. Thanks for the reminder, Captain JT Kirk. But you're right. We dropped the ball on that one. But we need to We dressed obviously with went on last week on Monday, but let's talk about latest numbers. I know High Tide had a heck of a quarter again. Was that an all-time high in their quarter?
No, their EBITDA was down tremendously.
Oh, was it? I thought revenue-wise that they were up and had highest revenue reported ever in a quarter.
Might have been the revenue, but their EBITDA was down tremendously. And Raj came out and commented though that it was due to their growth strategy, short-term pain for long-term gain.
Gotcha.
I think it was a pretty good quarter overall, but some of the metrics were down.
Yep. All right, we're rambling here, but we'll get on that, Captain JT Kirk. And you're right, D. Finney. If you like this video we produced here, don't be afraid to give this video a like. We very much appreciate it. Increase the algorithms and spread the word. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We'll see you back here Monday, or should say Friday at 11 a.m. with Charlie Bachtel and Frank Colombo. Enjoy the rest of your day. AV, I'll talk to you later. Hey, everybody. Stay connected here. The latest Traded Black podcast. Another great episode under the belt. What'd y'all think? Do you like what we had to say? Please leave any comments below. And as usual, make sure to subscribe to our Baked In newsletter. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to smash that like button, leave some comments, as I said before, and subscribe to our channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.